Alright, this is a review video for everybody in AP Government that's going to be taking the test this week. I'll be going along the actual review that I handed out to you in class. So if you want to follow along, what I want to do is spend some time hitting on some of the major points, some common questions I've seen, and hopefully kind of help you prepare and focus your preparations a little bit more for the exam. Just a reminder, this test is 50-50, like our other tests have been, 40 multiple choice, and then the 2 FRQs, 50%, 50%. As I've said before in class many times, although you're only writing 2 FRQs, I recommend outlining all 5 because that material you'll see one way or the other on multiple choice, even if you don't do it on writing. So looking at these, I just want to hit on some of the major points and concerns that I've seen in multiple. In the first essay in topic 1 of the Constitution, people have been able to identify who Federalists and Anti-Federalists were. There's been a lot of discussion I've seen in each class about not really being clear on the amendments and the role they're playing here. The First and 10th Amendments being amendments that are part of our Bill of Rights that protect our rights and that of the states, heavily favored by the Anti-Federalists. And so the one key takeaway is that with the 10th Amendment, for example, it says that anything that's not in the Constitution or doesn't give the federal government that power in the Constitution, it automatically goes to the states. So in all these debates between states versus the national government, central government versus local government, state governments have always used the 10th Amendment as their kind of cornerstone of their argument. On the flip side of that, Federalists and more people who favor a strong central government are going to favor something like the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment has multiple clauses: the Due Process Clause, the Equal Protection Clause, the Citizenship Clause. Long story short, what all these are doing is essentially giving the federal government, the national government, an excuse to go in and protect the rights of citizens. So if they feel that, yes, it doesn't say that we have that right to enforce or regulate that in the Constitution. However, because of this 14th Amendment that we've added, it says that we have a responsibility to make sure due process, equal protection, and the rights of citizens are guaranteed. If we feel that a local or state government is violating that, we're going to get involved. And so each one of those kind of, like I said, they balance each other out in a way, but they are at odds. They're conflicting. And the mediator in that, ultimately, at the end of the day, is the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, time and time again, has ruled most of the time in favor of the federal government. But back to, and that's more of the federalism issue, but back to the constitutional debates here, Anti-Federalists wanted a guarantee, and they got it through the 10th Amendment, that they weren't going to have federal government kind of running loose and doing whatever whenever they wanted. Now, almost 100 years later, after the Civil War, the federal government passes the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, in many ways, challenges the 10th Amendment, and that's why we have the courts that have to rule on that. But the point is, with the 14th Amendment on, we've had a more and more powerful national government. Now, if you look at topic 2, and we look at voting behavior, there's multiple amendments there, 15, 19, 26. All right, those amendments you can look up that all give the right to vote to different people. First, not based on race, then to women and 18-year-old and up. That's, once again, it's okay it's good. You want to define them. That's part of the job. But you also have to explain, like the question asks, how does it impact voting behavior? So not just that there are more people voting, but bringing the demographic ideas we talked about. For example, in general, how do women tend to vote? How do younger people tend to vote? And so let's see, if I'm talking about the 26th Amendment, because I've now increased the number of younger voters, that tends to favor, more times than not, a more liberal candidates, because younger people tend to vote more liberal. Same thing with women. And so we can talk about how that's changed the dynamics of politics. Motor voter laws were first intended to increase the number of voters, but they've actually had a negative effect because not everybody has a driver's license. Photo ID laws have definitely had a negative effect in the sense that a lot of qualified citizens to vote just don't have photo ID. So in general, photo ID laws have decreased the number of voter turnout. Talking about other demographic things, I think you can explain how education and age affects your likelihood to vote. And another big concern that's been on the 4th bullet on topic 2, primary versus general, presidential, and midterm. These are just simply 2 different ways of classifying elections. Every election can either be called general or primary. A general election is an election that is the final election. It's the election that involves candidates from each party. A primary election is an election for the election. It's an election within a party to choose who's going to run in the general election. It's the preseason, if you will, to the actual season. So that's one way of classifying elections. The other way is midterm versus presidential. Every 2 years we have a national election. We just had our midterm elections. What makes it a midterm election instead of a presidential election is that a midterm is in the middle of a president's term of office, and the presidential election is a year that a president is either up for re-election or we have 2 new candidates like we will have in 2016. So yet another way of looking at it. And the tendencies are this: people get out and vote more in presidential elections rather than midterm because they feel that the president has more of an impact on them. In reality, we know that it's Congress that has more of an impact, but Americans, that's how the media perceives it, gets more attention. Same thing with general and primary. We, as Americans, tend to go more in the general election. It's the election that matters, so that's where we're going to spend our time. We don't spend as much time in the primary election actually picking who's going to be running. Topic 3 is an essay very close to we've done before on our Congress test. And I know a lot of you can identify a student filibuster, the House Rules Committee, Conference Committee. Once again, not just defining the terms, but actually answer the question. The question, if you read on bullet 1 under topic 3, be able to explain each and provide examples of how each play a role in the lawmaking process. So I can define what a Senate filibuster is and how it's the senator holding the floor for an unlimited amount of time, continuously. However, I need to go a step further and say this impacts the lawmaking process by slowing it down, that they can delay voting on a bill. I have to be very clear that I answer both parts of that. Next, you have legislative oversight. You guys have done a good job on the Congress test of identifying that. Legislative oversight is how the legislative branch, can regulate everybody else. That could be through funding, through approving or disapproving appointments, and stuff like that. Casework is anything that a congressman is doing for their actual constituents, the people back home in their district, or in a senator's case, the people from their actual state. So the idea is this: the more you're doing casework, the less you're probably actually in Washington passing laws. And so it's kind of a balance that you need to do a lot of casework in the sense that you want your constituents to know you and then therefore re-elect you. At the same time, to actually get stuff done for them, you have to be in Washington, taking part in the legislative process. So it's a battle. It's a balance between the two. If you look at that point, it says, how does it impact a congressman's attention to legislation? Well, the more you're doing casework, the less attention you're paying attention to what's going on in Washington. So every congressman and congresswoman has to find some sort of balance between doing casework for their actual constituents as well as actually making laws in Congress. And sometimes the way they vote indicates that. If they're voting on something that is going to specifically impact their district, that's casework. If they're voting for something just because their party wants them to vote that way on this national issue, that's not casework. And so they have to find a balance between that. Interest groups, you can go talk about how they impact elections through money, through their lobbying ability. Iron triangles are those groups of, if you have an interest group, the actual lawmakers in Congress, as well as the government agencies. So the example I gave you is the military being the ones actually doing the work, Congress setting the laws and budget for the military. Then there's the interest group in this situation are the actual weapons manufacturers, the people who are making money off of supplying the military. The theory behind iron triangles is that you could set up an iron triangle like that for anything really in the United States, any topic, and that's how things get done. In other words, the interest groups play an integral role. It's not just the lawmakers and the people carrying out the laws. These interest groups, either in the form of an actual interest group or in the form of business, actually have an impact. Amicus curiae briefs are statements issued by an interest group, or really anybody that wants to, and they are what are called statements of interest. They're submitted to the Supreme Court or to a court that essentially is providing information that they feel the judge should be aware of. Now, obviously, they're going to be submitting information that is going to favor their cause or how they want the judge to ultimately rule, but it's yet another way that an interest group can have an impact on government decision making, in this case on the courts. Going on with that, I think the media, you can explain the role they've played. Federalism, I've talked a lot about that already when we're talking about the 10th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, but going on to also talk about how we have checks and balances in place within the national government and giving examples of that. And then Establishment Clause, that second bullet point, topic 5, that's just saying that the government can't officially endorse, which we're referring to as religion. It's that separation of church and state. But it's also meaning any organization. For example, I think I used one class last week, on Friday, I said that you can't, the federal government can't say this is the official drink of the United States, and you can only, this is what we support and only this. No, that's an establishment clause. In other words, the government is supposed to govern. They aren't supposed to try and dictate our morals or cultural things. That's up to our individual. It's our freedoms. I mentioned the citizenship clause. That's just simply saying that the federal government has a responsibility and a duty to protect your rights as a citizen. If you look through some of the multiple choice stuff, I tried to add some things that I didn't talk about as much in the essays. So I mentioned the court cases you'll see there. Marbury versus Madison being judicial review. A lot of these are pretty straightforward. A lot of these cases we've talked about. I talked about impact of demographics. So a lot of this stuff it's in the essays, but it's just I want to reiterate it because I saw it, a lot of this in particular. You'll notice towards the bottom under the multiple choice, I highlighted some things about the president. For example, there's always something about the president's ability to deploy troops and declare to wage war. There's always something about the elections, which there wasn't really an FRQ about elections, but about the Electoral College, about how candidates focus on the battleground or swing states, and that's because of how the Electoral College is set up, and stuff like that. So, what I recommend, once again, going through this is like, even if you think you know everything on this review, I still see a very strong value in actually going through and writing this stuff out. Even if you already know it in your head, writing it out, looking at it, process it. It's all about the memory retention process. That's going to help you with that. All the PowerPoints that I've ever done and everything else, as well as some other review videos and materials for AP Government, are on my page on the school website, along where you got this video from. And like I said, I'm here after school this week if you need help before the exam. Other than that, I just feel free to email me any questions or physically come see me. But that's really about it. Like I said, I recommend, really going through this so that you do well in the exam and so that you do well for the course. Because this is, once again, the last thing I'll leave you with. Approach this, not that it's more important than your other finals, but it is different because it's a complete course final. This isn't like a midterm, middle of the year. It is what it is after this. So I wish you the best of luck, and as I said in class, results will be posted fairly quickly, and so you'll know where you stand. All right, I appreciate it.